The church was full of people wearing their finest clothes, but no one dared to speak. An awkward silence hung in the air like a heavy curtain, and every eye was focused on the young black woman standing beside the billionaire at the front. Her trembling hands clutched his arm, but there was a fierce look in her eyes that nobody expected. She seemed out of place among the fancy dresses and polished shoes, yet she held her ground with surprising confidence. The bride, dressed in a lavish white gown, looked like she wanted to sink into the floor. People whispered furiously, their voices charged with shock and curiosity. It seemed like time had stopped, and the tension was so thick that a single pin drop would have sounded like thunder. No one had imagined this moment could unravel in such a dramatic way, and they waited, hearts pounding, to see what would happen next. 2 days earlier, Ethan Grant had been sitting alone in his huge penthouse overlooking the city skyline. He was worth more money than most people could ever imagine, but at that moment, he felt nothing but emptiness. He kept checking the date on his phone. He had received an invitation to his ex-fiancee's wedding, which was happening very soon. The golden card sat on his coffee table, catching his eye every few minutes. It was made of thick, expensive paper with intricate designs on the edges, and it had a slight sheen under the light. He could not stop staring at it. He wondered if he should go. After all, attending the wedding of the woman who had once promised to marry him felt like stepping into a pit of scorpions. But something in him refused to stay home. He wanted closure, or at least to show up and prove that he was past all the pain she had caused him. Her name was Caroline. She had been the love of his life, or so he had believed. For a moment, he remembered the time they had shared. Caroline had been charming, elegant, and quick-witted. She also had ambition. She wanted to be a successful designer, and Ethan had thought their dreams aligned. But somewhere along the way, they lost their spark. Or maybe Caroline found someone she thought was more exciting. She ended their engagement, leaving Ethan blindsided and bitter. She later announced her new romance with a wealthy businessman named Patrick, who was flamboyant and always showed off. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck and sighed. He had never felt so hurt in his life. Yet as the day of her wedding drew near, a strange sense of determination bubbled inside him. He would not hide. He would appear at that ceremony and show that he was strong. He would show the world that Caroline was not the only one who could move on. But how? Going there by himself would only make him look like he was still pining for her. He turned on the television just to drown out the noise in his head. An old movie played. The volume turned low. His mind raced, searching for a plan. Then a bold thought occurred to him. What if he brought someone who would make Caroline jealous? Someone different, someone so unexpected that Caroline would question all her choices. But whom could he take? He had never dated seriously after Caroline, so there was no steady girlfriend. He wanted a partner who could catch everyone's attention. In that moment, he had no idea that his life was about to change in a way he could never have guessed. Jade Halliwell was standing on a cold street corner, hugging her thin jacket around her shoulders. Nightfall had arrived, and it brought a sharp wind that cut through her clothes. She had nowhere to go. She had lost her job a month ago after her boss decided to downsize, and she couldn't afford her rent. She had no family nearby and no real friends she could trust. Before she knew it, she was out on the streets. It felt impossible. One day, she had been barely making ends meet as a waitress at a small diner. The next, she was on the sidewalk with her backpack, desperately looking for any place to spend a night that wouldn't freeze her solid. Her cheeks burned with shame each time she realized she was homeless. She was only 23, and life had already thrown her more curveballs than she could count. Still, Jade tried to keep her spirits up. She was determined not to stay homeless forever. She had grown up in a rough neighborhood and had survived plenty of hardships. But surviving alone was draining. She had not eaten a decent meal in 2 days, and her last shower had been in a public restroom sink. Yet she held on to her pride, even when people passed her without so much as a glance. She sat on a bench and scanned the sidewalk, hoping for a stroke of luck. People in suits walked quickly, ignoring her presence as if she was part of the concrete itself. Jade's stomach growled. She clenched her teeth and told herself she would find work soon, if only someone would give her a chance. Just then, an expensive car pulled up to the curb. It was sleek and black, and it stood out in this area where most cars were older models. Jade found herself momentarily distracted by its glossy paint. When the door opened, a man stepped out wearing a tailored suit. He walked toward the building behind her, probably heading for a meeting or a late dinner. Their eyes met for a split second, and in that time, Jade noticed a twinge of sadness hidden in his deep brown eyes. She had no clue who he was, or that this chance encounter would lead her to an unimaginable place. Ethan was heading out for a business meeting with an old friend who managed a charity. They were hoping to start a new foundation to help disadvantaged youth. However, as he neared the building, he saw a young woman on the bench. Her clothes were worn, and she looked exhausted. Yet there was a quiet strength in the way she held herself. She met his gaze with a simple nod, not a begging gesture or a helpless stare. Dear amazing family, I want to take a moment to say thank you for spending your valuable time on my story. Your support and interest mean more than words can describe. Seeing your responses and knowing you followed along on this journey truly warms my heart. If you enjoy what you read, I'd love to invite you to subscribe to my page or channel and leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Your feedback helps me grow and motivates me to keep creating stories that move and inspire. Thank you again for being such a wonderful audience. Something inside Ethan twisted. He had always donated money to shelters and projects, but rarely did he ever engage in direct conversation with someone in need. He decided to approach her. He walked up slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Hello," he said quietly, offering a friendly smile. She nodded again and said, "Hi." Her voice was soft but clear. "Are you all right?" he asked, searching her face. She shrugged, almost as if the situation was normal to her. "I'm trying to be." He felt a pang of guilt for all the times he had walked past someone without a second thought. He reached into his pocket for his wallet. He wanted to offer her money, but something stopped him. That felt impersonal. Instead, he asked, "Have you eaten?" She shook her head. "Not in a while," she admitted, her eyes dropping to the ground. Ethan glanced at his watch. He had time before his meeting. "Would you like to grab something to eat? There's a diner down the street." Jade hesitated. She had no idea who he was, or if this was a trick, but the genuine kindness in his expression made her nod. "Okay." She rose from the bench, feeling lightheaded from hunger but determined to keep her dignity. Ethan guided her toward his car, and she stared at it in disbelief. Was this man really taking her to a diner in such a fancy vehicle? The little diner at the corner was nearly empty. Its neon sign flickered from an overworked bulb, giving the place a warm but slightly run-down feeling. They sat in a corner booth, facing each other. Jade's stomach rumbled again as she looked at the menu, overwhelmed by the choices. "Order whatever you want," Ethan said, noticing her hesitation. "Thanks," she replied softly. She decided on a simple sandwich and a glass of water. No matter how hungry she was, she felt uncomfortable ordering something too pricey. When the waitress left, Ethan turned back to Jade. "I'm Ethan." He paused, giving her room to reply. "Jade." He nodded. "Nice to meet you, Jade. I hope you don't mind me asking, but how did you end up on that bench?" Jade did not bristle at his question. She sensed no judgment from him, only curiosity and concern. With a small sigh, she told him a shortened version of her story. Losing her job, missing rent, and having nowhere to go. She left out the worst details, like the night she had slept behind dumpsters to keep warm, or the fear she felt when passing groups of strangers. Ethan listened intently. He frowned when she described her landlord kicking her out with no mercy. She also admitted that finding a new job had been tough because she had dropped out of college to help her mother back when she was sick. Jade's mother had passed away 2 years ago, leaving Jade with unpaid medical bills. "It must be difficult," Ethan said softly. "I'm sorry you're going through this." Jade shrugged. "It's not easy, but I'm trying to find a way out." When her sandwich came, she started eating slowly at first, but hunger took over, and she finished it quickly. She felt a bit embarrassed for eating so fast, but Ethan just smiled. "I have a meeting soon," Ethan said after a moment. "But if you'd like, I can help you find a place to stay for tonight. There are shelters, or I can arrange for a hotel room." Jade's eyes widened. She had never met such a generous stranger. Caution still lingered in her mind. She had been warned that people sometimes offered help only to demand something in return. But something about Ethan's gentle voice and steady gaze made her believe he wasn't that kind of person. "That would be amazing," she said, a slight tremble in her voice. "Thank you so much." Ethan nodded. "After that, maybe we can look for a more permanent solution. If you're interested, I might be able to help you find a job." Jade's heart raced. This felt too good to be true, but she was in no position to refuse a chance. "I'd appreciate that," she replied, trying not to show just how desperate she was. That night, Ethan arranged for a hotel room not far from his penthouse. It was clean, comfortable, and safe. Jade walked in, her eyes wide as she took in the plush bed and the small desk in the corner. She turned to thank him once more, but he simply smiled and told her to rest. She slept better than she had in weeks, and in the morning, she found a new outfit waiting for her, a simple blouse and jeans, along with a note that read, "I didn't know your size, so I guessed. Let's meet in the lobby at 9 a.m. Jade felt a warmth in her chest. This man's kindness was unlike anything she had experienced lately. She freshened up, put on the clothes, and went downstairs. Ethan was waiting by the reception desk, checking his phone. When he looked up and saw her, he gave her a smile and motioned for her to join him. They had a quick breakfast. Then Ethan took her to a business complex in the city. He introduced her to a friend who needed a receptionist for a small startup company. Jade had some computer skills, and though she was nervous, she answered the manager's questions honestly. By midday, she had secured a trial period to prove she could handle the work. She could hardly believe how fast her life was changing. Ethan didn't hover or push her into anything. He let her lead conversations, letting her share what she could do. He merely opened the door and allowed her to walk through on her own. Afterward, they rode together in silence. Jade kept stealing glances at Ethan, wondering why he was doing all this for her. He had mentioned that he often donated to charities, but there seemed to be more to it than just goodwill. By the time they reached the hotel, Ethan looked distracted. He cleared his throat and finally asked, "Jade, can I ask you something a bit unusual?" She felt her heartbeat quicken. "Sure, ask me anything." "You know I'm trying to help you get on your feet," he began, "and I'm happy to do that. But I also have something else on my mind. There's this wedding I have to attend." He stopped, measuring his words. "My ex-fiancée is getting married. I don't want to go alone." Jade arched her eyebrows, not sure she understood yet. "You want me to go with you?" "Yes. I know it sounds strange, but I could really use someone by my side who stands out in a good way. You're confident, and you handle yourself with dignity. I think Caroline, my ex, would never expect me to show up with someone like you. Honestly, I just don't want to appear like I'm still stuck in the past." Jade bit her lip. "But I have nothing to do with any of that," she said, feeling unsure. "And I don't exactly have a fancy dress or anything." Ethan nodded. "I'll take care of all that. I'll pay for the dress, and I'll make sure you're comfortable. You've already impressed me with your honesty and spirit. All I need is your presence. In return, I'll continue helping you until you can stand on your own. You'll get a steady paycheck from your job soon, and hopefully that will lead to a better future." Jade inhaled slowly. It was a bizarre situation, but she could see that Ethan truly did not want to face his ex alone. Part of her also thought, maybe this is my chance to repay him for his kindness. She nodded. "All right, I'll do it, but I can't promise I'll be the most glamorous date." Ethan gave a grin that lit up his face. "Trust me, you'll be perfect." The next day, Ethan took Jade to an upscale boutique. She had never set foot in a place like this. Elegant mannequins lined the windows, wearing dresses that cost more than she used to earn in a year. The store employees seemed startled to see a woman dressed in simple jeans and sneakers come in with such a wealthy man. But when Ethan spoke to them, they quickly catered to Jade's every need. She tried on several dresses. Each time she emerged from the dressing room, she felt a bit like Cinderella. Beautiful fabrics hugged her figure, and the store attendant fussed with hems and stitches, making sure everything fit perfectly. Finally, they found a sleek blue evening gown, that made Jade's deep brown skin glow. She could hardly recognize herself in the mirror. "Wow," Ethan said when she stepped out, his voice laced with genuine admiration. "That looks stunning on you." Jade's cheeks warmed. She had never thought of herself as someone who could look like this. "It's beautiful," she whispered, "but it must cost a fortune." Ethan shrugged. "Don't worry about that. It's worth it." They also picked out matching heels, which Jade wobbled in at first. Ethan chuckled, reassuring her she would get used to them. Then he guided her to a salon where she got her hair styled in a simple but elegant updo. The stylist used subtle makeup to highlight her features. By the time they were done, Jade felt like a different person, though a bit overwhelmed by all the fuss. When they finally headed back, Jade's heart pounded. Tomorrow was the wedding. She would be there with Ethan, a billionaire she had just met, facing his ex-fiancé's crowd. She had a sinking feeling that people might judge her, but she also felt a hint of excitement. No one had ever treated her like this before, as though she mattered enough to be seen and heard. That night, Ethan made a brief phone call to confirm the final details of the wedding. Then he pulled out the invitation and studied it again. He had no intention of causing a scene, but a small part of him wanted Caroline to regret leaving him. He could not deny that Jade's presence would create a stir. She was beautiful, confident, and had an air of quiet determination that set her apart from the usual socialites who circled his world. He liked that. She was real. She understood hardship and survival. In many ways, her perspective on life was refreshing, but he also knew that people in his social circle could be snobbish. They would wonder who Jade was, where she came from, and why Ethan brought her. He also worried about how Jade would handle any rude comments or subtle looks. Yet something told him she was strong enough to face it. He sat in his study, gazing out the window at the city lights. He thought about how odd it was that he found Jade just in time for this wedding. It felt almost like fate. Early the next morning, Jade got dressed in the hotel. She had carefully laid out the gown, the new shoes, and the small clutch that matched everything. She spent extra time checking her reflection, smoothing down any wrinkles, and making sure she looked presentable. Butterflies fluttered in her stomach. She wondered about the woman Ethan had been engaged to. Caroline must have been beautiful and sophisticated. Jade could not imagine living in that sort of privileged world. But she reminded herself that Ethan had chosen to bring her, and she would do her best not to let him down. When Ethan arrived to pick her up, he wore a tailored black suit with a crisp white shirt and a sky blue tie that matched Jade's dress. They looked coordinated, almost like they had planned it. As they stepped into the limousine, Jade noticed Ethan's tense posture. She touched his arm. "You okay?" she asked gently. He forced a small smile. "Nervous, I guess. I haven't seen Caroline face to face since the breakup." Jade gave his arm a light squeeze. "We'll get through it together." Her words seemed to relax him. He reached over and patted her hand. "Thank you for doing this. Really." With that, the limo pulled away from the curb and headed toward the grand church where Caroline's wedding would take place. The church was huge, with tall arches and stained glass windows that reflected rainbow colors on the floor. Guests poured in wearing expensive suits, designer dresses, and sparkling jewelry. Jade swallowed hard when she saw the crowd. She felt like an outsider in a world of wealth. But Ethan kept a firm yet gentle hold on her arm. He guided her up the steps, and the crowd parted slightly, many people recognizing him. They offered polite greetings, though some eyes slid over to Jade with curious or judgmental stares. Jade kept her head high, remembering the posture the salon staff had taught her. Inside the church, white flowers and silky ribbons decorated the pews. Soft music played from a string quartet. Jade spotted the groom near the altar, talking to a few groomsmen. He was tall with sharply styled hair and a confident grin. That must be Patrick. Ethan tensed at the sight of him, but he managed to keep walking. He found a seat near the front, guided Jade to sit beside him, and waited. Whispers floated around them, and Jade knew people were talking. She caught phrases like, "Is that Ethan Grant? And who is she?" Ethan leaned in and whispered, "You're doing great." She smiled, feeling a slight blush cross her cheeks. Soon, the music changed to the familiar wedding march. Everyone turned, craning their necks to see the bride's entrance. Caroline appeared at the end of the aisle, her arm linked to an older man who must have been her father. She wore a stunning white gown with a flowing train that swept behind her. Her veil was pinned with tiny crystals that sparkled under the lights. She looked serene, her face calm, but when her gaze shifted and landed on Ethan, a flicker of surprise rippled across her features. Jade saw it clearly. Caroline's steps faltered for just a second, but she recovered quickly and continued down the aisle. Ethan maintained a polite, neutral expression, but Jade could sense his discomfort. She lightly placed her hand over his, offering silent support. The ceremony moved along, and the priest began speaking of love and commitment. Jade glanced over at Ethan occasionally, noticing how his jaw tightened. The tension in the air seemed to grow thick. As the priest asked if anyone objected to the union, a charged silence took over the room. Jade's heart pounded, hoping Ethan would not do anything drastic. He remained calm, and the ceremony proceeded. Caroline and Patrick exchanged rings and said their vows. Jade felt Ethan's hand shake slightly. When the priest declared them husband and wife, polite applause rose. Caroline glanced at Ethan again before she turned to walk back down the aisle with her new husband. There was a subtle storm in her eyes, something no one else seemed to notice. After the ceremony, guests filed out to head toward the reception hall. It was in a lavish venue not far from the church, complete with crystal chandeliers and gilded pillars. Tables had been arranged for the guests, each one draped in silky cloth and adorned with bouquets. Soft music played while servers wandered around with trays of champagne. Ethan guided Jade to a table near the front. She recognized a few faces from business magazines, CEOs, investors, and other socialites. They greeted Ethan with forced warmth, but many openly stared at Jade with suspicion. Caroline and Patrick were busy receiving congratulations, but Jade could feel the bride's eyes darting toward them every so often. "I think she's noticed you," Jade whispered, trying to keep her composure. "That was the point," Ethan replied, though his voice was laced with anxiety. Soon, a small cluster of people approached their table. A tall brunette woman with a diamond necklace looked Jade up and down before smiling sweetly at Ethan. "Ethan, darling, it's been ages. How are you doing?" "Just fine, Veronica," Ethan said, returning the polite smile. "This is Jade." Jade nodded in greeting, noticing how Veronica's eyes flickered with curiosity. Veronica forced a kind tone as she said, "Lovely to meet you, Jade. So, how you two know each other?" Jade felt her pulse spike. She hadn't prepared a backstory. Ethan stepped in smoothly. "We met through a mutual friend. Jade's a wonderful person, and I'm happy she could join me." Veronica's expression shifted as though she smelled something odd. "I see." She gave a tight-lipped grin and then whispered something to the man beside her. Jade had a feeling she was gossiping already. Despite the uneasy looks, Jade reminded herself to stay calm. This was just for one evening, and she had promised Ethan she would help him. After dinner was served, the newlyweds did their first dance. Caroline floated across the dance floor in Patrick's arms, wearing a smile that many would think was a picture of happiness. But Jade noticed that her eyes were not on Patrick's face. They kept darting toward Ethan's table. When the dance ended and the band invited everyone to join the floor, Caroline and Patrick made their rounds, thanking guests for coming. Eventually, they reached Ethan and Jade. "Ethan," Caroline greeted with a careful tone. "I'm glad you came." Her eyes slid to Jade. "And who is this?" Ethan stood, maintaining a polite demeanor. "This is Jade Hallowell." Jade gave a small nod. "Nice to meet you. Congratulations on your wedding." Caroline smiled, though it looked forced. "Thank you." She paused as if searching Jade's face for clues. Patrick, standing beside Caroline, offered a stiff handshake. "So, how did you two meet?" Caroline asked, not bothering to hide her curiosity. Jade opened her mouth, but Ethan answered first. "We met not long ago, but it feels like we've known each other for years." His words rolled out smoothly, but Jade picked up on a note of tension. Caroline's lips twitched. "How wonderful." She hesitated, glancing around. "I hope you're enjoying the reception." Ethan nodded. "Yes, it's very nice." Without warning, Caroline reached for Ethan's arm, pulling him aside. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" Patrick raised an eyebrow, but he didn't stop her. Jade stood there awkwardly for a second, watching them step away. She saw Caroline lean in to whisper urgently to Ethan, her brows creased in frustration. Patrick cleared his throat. "So, Jade, right?" "That's me," she replied, forcing a polite tone. He studied her, his expression unreadable. "Never seen you around before." "I'm new," Jade said, which was a truth in more ways than one. Patrick shrugged. "Ethan's a successful man. I hope you know what you're getting into." Jade kept her face neutral. "He's been kind to me. That's all I need to know right now." Patrick looked like he wanted to say more, but Caroline and Ethan returned. Caroline's face was flushed, her jaw tense. She gave Jade one more cool glance and said, "We should mingle with the other guests. Enjoy the party." Then the newlyweds moved along, leaving Jade and Ethan in a swirl of confusion. "What was that about?" Jade asked Ethan softly once they were out of earshot. Ethan shook his head. "Caroline said something about hoping I'm not trying to cause trouble. She told me it was rude to bring a date well, basically she said you're not our type of crowd." Jade's cheeks heated. She felt anger blossom in her chest. "Wow," she said under her breath. "Try to keep calm." "Don't worry about it," Ethan said, placing a hand on hers. "She's just insecure." Jade swallowed the bitterness. She didn't want to let it ruin the evening or the reason they came here in the first place. She looked around and noticed other people on the dance floor. Music played, and couples swayed under the soft lights. "Want to dance?" Ethan asked, a small, comforting smile returning to his face. Jade hesitated. She had never danced in a place like this, wearing such a fancy dress. But she wanted to show Caroline that she was not intimidated. "Yes," she said, her voice steady. They walked onto the dance floor, and Ethan placed a hand on her waist, taking her other hand gently. Jade followed his lead. It took a moment to adjust, but soon she found a rhythm with him. The crowd watched them, some whispering, others simply enjoying the moment. For a few minutes, Jade forgot about her fears. She forgot about the stares and the gossip. She just danced with Ethan, feeling the music flow around them. Her heart pounded with something new, excitement, gratitude, and maybe a hint of admiration for the man who had extended such kindness to her. As the reception wore on, Jade noticed Caroline glancing their way more and more often. Whenever Ethan laughed at something Jade said, Caroline's face would tighten. Patrick seemed to notice, too, and his mood darkened. Tension gathered in the air around them like a thundercloud. Eventually, the bride and groom stepped away for a moment. Jade excused herself to go to the restroom. When she emerged, she nearly bumped into Caroline, who was standing in the hallway, her arms folded. Caroline looked Jade up and down with an expression that was partly curiosity, partly resentment. "I don't know what game Ethan is playing," she said in a low voice, "but I know you're not someone he would normally date." Jade's shoulders stiffened. She took a steady breath, reminding herself that Ethan had asked her to be here. "Ethan can make his own choices," she said quietly, meeting Caroline's gaze. Caroline's eyes flickered. "I suppose so. I just wonder what you're hoping to gain from him. Money? Status?" Jade felt her anger rising, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm not after anything. He's helping me get on my feet, and that's all you need to know." Caroline's lip curled. "Helping you get on your feet? So you are a charity case." The word stung, but Jade refused to show weakness. She lifted her chin. "You can think whatever you like, but I won't let you talk down to me." Caroline seemed taken aback by Jade's directness. "I'm not trying to be insulting. I'm just surprised Ethan would bring someone so far from his usual circle." Jade almost laughed at the irony. "Maybe that's exactly why he brought me," she retorted. Caroline's face hardened. She opened her mouth to speak, but was cut off by the sound of approaching footsteps. Ethan appeared from around the corner, worry flickering in his eyes as he saw them both. "Is everything okay?" he asked, stepping between them slightly. Caroline gave him a tight smile. "Absolutely. Just having a chat with your date. I hope you both enjoy the rest of the night." Then she walked away, Her head held high. Ethan turned to Jade. "What happened?" Jade shook her head. "Nothing I can't handle. Let's just go back inside." But inside, Jade's heart was pounding from the unpleasant encounter. She had done her best to remain calm. She didn't want to ruin Ethan's plan. He had been so kind to her, and she wanted to be strong. They stayed at the wedding for another hour. Jade made small talk with a few guests, holding her own despite the subtle and sometimes not so subtle judgments sent her way. Ethan's presence helped, as he shielded her from the worst of the gossip, but she could not miss the pointed looks from some of Caroline's closest friends. Eventually, Ethan decided it was time to leave. He took Jade's hand and led her out to the waiting limousine. As soon as they were inside, he let out a long sigh. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't mean for it to be so stressful." Jade shook her head. "It's okay. I knew this wouldn't be easy." He studied her face. Caroline can be intense. She never liked surprises. Jade let out a small laugh. "Well, you definitely surprised her." Ethan smiled back, a trace of satisfaction in his eyes. "Yes, I think I did." They rode in silence for a bit, each lost in thought. Then, softly, Jade asked, "Do you still love her?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "I loved the woman I thought she was. But after the way she left me and how she behaves now, I realized maybe I was in love with an idea, a fantasy. She wasn't who I believed her to be." Jade nodded. She understood how that could happen. People could hide their true selves behind charm and beauty. When the car stopped at the hotel, Jade prepared to say goodnight, but Ethan stepped out after her. He walked her to the elevator. "I know this might be sudden," he said softly, "but do you want to grab a late dinner somewhere quiet? I feel like we never really got to talk without eyes on us." She was tired, but she also felt a genuine connection forming between them. "Sure," she said, smiling. "That sounds nice." They found a small restaurant on a quiet street. The lighting was dim and the menu was modest. It was the kind of place that catered to regular folks, not billionaires. Jade felt more comfortable there, away from the pretenses of the wedding crowd. They picked a corner booth, and Ethan asked about her life, her dreams, and how she hoped to shape her future. Jade talked about wanting to go back to school someday, maybe study something related to community work. She had always wanted to help others who struggled like she did. Ethan listened, sipping his coffee. "I think that's wonderful. There's such a need for people who truly care." She smiled. "I'm not sure how I'll get there, but I'm determined." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "You will. Sometimes all we need is a chance and a bit of support. I had privileges growing up that most people don't have, and I want to use them for good. That's why I started that foundation for children in need." Jade nodded, remembering he had mentioned a charity meeting. "I appreciate everything you've done for me," she said softly, fiddling with her napkin. "No one has ever treated me like I mattered enough to go through all this trouble." Ethan reached across the table and gently touched her hand. "You do matter. Don't let anyone, not even Caroline, tell you otherwise." His words made her chest feel tight with emotion. She smiled through the sting of tears that threatened to well up. They talked until the small restaurant began to close for the night. After Ethan paid the bill, they walked outside. The air was cool, and a faint breeze carried the scent of the city. Jade looked up at the skyscrapers, feeling small but also strangely hopeful. Ethan's driver pulled up, and he opened the car door for her. "Let's get you back to the hotel so you can rest," he said. On the ride back, they didn't speak much. The warmth of their conversation lingered between them, a silent understanding that something was shifting in both their lives. The following week was a whirlwind. Jade started her new job at the startup, working diligently to prove herself. She spent her evenings studying new skills online, determined to climb out of homelessness for good. Ethan continued checking in on her, sometimes inviting her to dinner, other times sending her encouraging messages. Jade used the money from her paycheck to rent a small room in a shared apartment, no longer needing to stay in a hotel. She still faced daily struggles, balancing her budget, learning new responsibilities at work, and fighting the lingering shame of her recent homelessness. But each day, she grew more confident. She dressed in simple but neat clothes, carried herself with pride, and even made a few acquaintances at her workplace. People noticed her friendly nature and willingness to help. Meanwhile, Ethan focused on his foundation, and they met often to discuss how Jade might assist with some projects there. She had ideas for outreach programs aimed at young adults who had aged out of foster care. Ethan listened with keen interest, promising to set up a meeting with his board. Though they never labeled their relationship, there was an unspoken closeness building. They talked about things that mattered deeply to them: family, loss, and hope for the future. Jade was careful to keep boundaries, knowing that a romantic tangle could complicate their arrangement. But every time Ethan smiled at her, she felt a warmth blossom in her chest. One evening, after a long day at work, Jade got a call from an unknown number. She answered cautiously, only to hear Caroline's voice on the other end. "Hello, Jade," Caroline said, her tone clipped. "I got your number from a friend." Jade tightened her grip on the phone. "Why are you calling me?" Caroline paused. "I want to talk to you about Ethan." Jade's mind raced. "I don't think we have anything to discuss." "Please," Caroline said, surprising Jade with a sudden softness in her voice. "Just meet me for coffee. I won't take much of your time." Against her better judgment, Jade agreed. She felt an odd curiosity about what Caroline had to say. Maybe she just wanted to settle whatever tension still existed. They arranged to meet at a small cafe near Jade's office. Jade arrived first, sitting at a table in the corner, her nerves on edge. Caroline walked in shortly after, wearing a fitted blazer and designer pants. She looked every bit the sophisticated socialite. Caroline sat down, offering a polite, if tense, smile. She ordered a latte and turned her attention to Jade. "I know you're busy, so I'll get to the point. I see that you and Ethan are spending time together." Jade kept her expression neutral. "Yes, we are. Mostly working on charity ideas." Caroline's gaze flickered. "That's fine, but you should know I've been talking with Ethan, too. We have history, and I realize now that I might have made a mistake." Jade raised an eyebrow. "A mistake?" Caroline sighed, glancing at her manicured nails. "Patrick and it's not what I envisioned. Things haven't been going well. I've been thinking a lot about my relationship with Ethan. I shouldn't have broken it off the way I did. And now, seeing him with you, I realize how much I miss him." A jolt of alarm shot through Jade. "He's told me how badly you hurt him." Caroline pressed her lips together. "I know. I regret it more than anything. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make it up to him. It'll give me another chance." Jade felt a rush of conflicting emotions. She wanted to protect Ethan from being hurt again, yet she also wondered if he would want to reconcile with Caroline. After all, she had been the love of his life at one point. "So why are you telling me this?" Jade asked quietly. Caroline leaned forward. "Because I think you might be standing in my way. I need to know if you're serious with him." Jade bristled. "Ethan can choose what he wants. He doesn't need me to decide for him." Caroline's expression hardened. "But you're new in his life. He barely knows you. Maybe he's just being kind because that's who he is. It doesn't mean he wants a real relationship with you." Jade's heart pounded. Her pride flared. "And maybe you're too late. You can't expect to walk back into his life after everything." Caroline's shoulders stiffened. She stood up, picking up her designer purse. "We'll see about that. Don't be surprised if he comes back to me. We have a bond you wouldn't understand." With that, she turned on her heel and left the cafe, leaving Jade trembling with anger and uncertainty. That night, Jade tossed and turned in her tiny room, replaying Caroline's words. She didn't know if Ethan still held any lingering feelings for his ex. Could he forgive Caroline for leaving him? Could he rekindle that old flame? She didn't have the right to ask him. She wasn't his girlfriend. They hadn't defined their relationship in any official way. Ethan was a friend, a benefactor, someone she deeply respected. But she couldn't deny she felt more for him now. The next day, she met Ethan for coffee, as they usually did. He noticed her pensive mood. "Something on your mind?" he asked gently. Jade hesitated, debating if she should bring up Caroline's visit. Finally, she decided honesty was best. "Caroline called me," she admitted. She wanted to talk. Ethan's eyes widened. She did? Yes, Jade said, her voice unsteady. She said she regrets leaving you. She's unhappy with Patrick, and she wants you back. Ethan's jaw tightened. He looked away for a moment, then back at Jade. I'm sorry she bothered you with that. She should have talked to me directly. Jade nodded. She thinks I'm in her way. Are you going to see her? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. She's texted me a few times, asking to meet up. I've been ignoring it, but maybe I should speak with her just to close this door. I don't want her pestering you. Jade's chest constricted. Are you sure that's all you want from her? Ethan studied her face. Yes, Jade. She hurt me too deeply. I might want an explanation, but I don't want her back. That ship sailed the day she left me without warning. Relief washed over Jade. She believed him. All right, she said quietly. He reached for her hand across the table. I'm sorry if this caused you stress. I appreciate that you told me. I promise I won't let her or anyone else complicate things for us. Jade nodded, a soft smile forming. She felt a surge of gratitude and something else. Hope that, perhaps, the bond they shared was worth defending. In the days that followed, Caroline became bolder. She sent Ethan messages about meeting up for lunch or coffee. He finally agreed to see her at a public restaurant, and Jade found her stomach churning at the thought of them alone together. But she trusted Ethan's words. That afternoon, Ethan emerged from the meeting looking drained. He called Jade immediately. Can we talk? He asked. They met at a small park. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows on the grass. They sat on a bench near a rose garden. Ethan blew out a frustrated breath. She wants me to leave everything behind and start over with her. She says she'll get a divorce if I say yes. Jade's eyes widened in shock. That's extreme. He nodded. Exactly. It's ridiculous. She just got married, and now she's talking about a divorce as if it's nothing. Jade shook her head. What did you tell her? I told her no, of course. I'm not going to be the reason her marriage fails, and I'm not going to put myself through that again. She's made her bed, and now she has to lie in it. Jade studied his face, sensing the turmoil he felt. She reached out to hold his hand, offering comfort. I'm sorry you had to go through that. He laced his fingers through hers. It's all right. I'm free of her now. I made it clear that I want nothing to do with her, though I doubt she'll give up easily. Jade felt a wave of relief, followed by guilt. She shouldn't celebrate someone's heartbreak, but she was glad Ethan stood firm. She also felt closer to him than ever before. A week later, Jade was busy with her new responsibilities at the startup when she got a strange message from her landlord. He told her a wealthy man had come by, asking questions about where she lived and how long she'd been there. Jade felt an uneasy chill. She suspected it might be Patrick, Caroline's husband, or someone working for them. Why would Patrick care about her situation? She tried to brush it off, but the unsettling feeling remained. Later that evening, Ethan called with alarming news. I got a call from Caroline's attorney, he said. Apparently, Patrick's discovered that Caroline has been meeting me behind his back. He's furious. He's blaming you, too. Jade swallowed hard. I don't understand. Why would he blame me? Ethan sounded apologetic. He believes you seduced me to make Caroline jealous, or that you encouraged Caroline to leave him. It's absurd, but he's angry and looking for someone to blame. Jade slumped onto her small sofa. That's crazy. I barely even talked to him. I know, Ethan soothed, but Patrick is impulsive. He might do something stupid. I just wanted you to be aware. Her heart pounded. She had escaped homelessness and was finally getting her life on track. She didn't need threats from a jealous husband. I'll be careful, Jade promised. Maybe I should stay away from you for a while, so I don't cause more problems. Ethan's voice went firm. No, Jade, none of this is your fault. I refuse to let Patrick scare you off. We're doing good work, and you have a right to live your life without harassment. If anything happens, you let me know. She felt a surge of gratitude mixed with anxiety. Okay, she said quietly. For a few days, nothing happened. Jade tried to carry on as normal. She focused on her job and the planning for Ethan's charity program, hoping that Patrick's anger would blow over. One evening, as Jade left her office, she noticed a sleek car parked across the street. A man in a suit watched her with narrowed eyes. She got a sense of danger and quickly walked the other way. The man followed at a distance. Jade hurried, her heart racing. After several blocks, the man didn't stop trailing her, so she ducked into a crowded store, waiting to see if he would appear. He never came in, and after a while, she thought he must have given up. She left the store carefully, constantly checking behind her until she reached her apartment. As soon as she got inside, she locked the door. She called Ethan. "I think someone followed me home tonight," she said, voice trembling. It might have been Patrick's people. Ethan cursed softly. "Pack a bag. I'm sending my driver to pick you up. You're staying at my place tonight." Jade wasn't sure if that was wise, but she realized it was safer than being alone. "All right," she agreed. Within half an hour, Ethan's car arrived, and Jade slid into the back seat, still shaken. When they got Ethan's penthouse, he was waiting at the door, worry etched into his face. He ushered her inside, offering her a warm drink. "I'm going to have someone watch your building," he said. "I hate that you're being harassed like this." Jade nodded, sipping her tea. "I just don't understand why Patrick would do this. He's scared Caroline will leave him and run to me. He thinks you're helping her do that," Ethan explained. "He's looking for someone to blame, and you're an easy target." Jade frowned. "But you don't want Caroline back. We've made that clear." Ethan shrugged. "Logic doesn't always matter to people who are angry." Jade sighed. "I feel guilty that you have to deal with all this because you helped me." He touched her arm gently. "Don't. None of this is your fault. I made the choice to bring you to that wedding. I don't regret it. It opened my eyes to the kind of people Caroline and Patrick are." She set down her mug and met his gaze. "Thank you for everything." They sat in silence for a moment, the city lights twinkling through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Then Ethan stood up. "Let me show you to the guest room. You should get some rest." Jade followed him upstairs. The guest room was spacious and comfortable, with large windows overlooking the city. She sat on the bed, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Before leaving, Ethan paused at the door. "I'll be right down the hall if you need anything." She nodded, giving him a soft smile. "Good night, Ethan." The next morning, Jade woke to the smell of fresh coffee. She stepped out of the guest room and found Ethan in the kitchen, reading the news on a tablet. He looked up and smiled. "Morning. Help yourself," he said, gesturing to the coffee pot. Jade poured herself a cup. "Any news?" He shook his head. "My security team didn't see anyone suspicious around your apartment last night, but they'll keep watching." Relief filled her. "Thank you. I really appreciate it." He set the tablet aside. "Jade, I've been thinking. You've done a great job at your new workplace, and you're good with the charity projects. Maybe it's time we consider a bigger role for you in my foundation. You could combine your administrative skills with direct community outreach." Her eyes widened. "You mean work for you?" He nodded. "Yes. You have insights and empathy that many of my staff lack. I think you could make a real difference. I can match or exceed the salary you're getting now, plus benefits. What do you think?" Jade felt a rush of excitement mixed with nerves. "I'd love to do that," she said, voice trembling slightly. "But I don't want people thinking you're just giving me a job because you feel sorry for me." Ethan stood and walked around the counter, looking her in the eyes. "I'm offering you this job because you're qualified and because I trust you. You've proven you're hardworking and compassionate. Those are qualities I need on my team." She set down her coffee, a broad smile blooming on her face. "Then yes, I'd be honored." He returned her smile. "Great. We'll discuss the details later. For now, I have to head to a meeting, and I'll drop you off at your office. You can give your notice whenever you feel comfortable." She nodded. "Thank you again, Ethan." As they drove through the busy morning traffic, Jade stared out the window, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude. A few months ago, she had been sleeping on a cold bench, wondering if she would survive another day. Now, she was riding a luxury car, about to start a new chapter in her life with a man who saw her value. Over the next week, Jade wrapped up her responsibilities at the startup. Her manager was sad to see her go, but wished her well. Meanwhile, Ethan arranged for her to have an office at his foundation's headquarters, which were housed in a modern building with bright, open spaces. When Jade stepped inside for the first time as a staff member, she felt a surge of pride and responsibility. The walls were decorated with photos of children's programs, educational workshops, and various charities the foundation supported. She met with some of the team members, who welcomed her warmly. One afternoon, Ethan gathered everyone in a conference room. He introduced Jade as the new community outreach coordinator. He praised her resilience and her passion for helping others. Jade blushed at the applause, grateful for the positive reception. After the meeting, Ethan and Jade went to his office to discuss her goals. She shared her idea of starting a mentorship program for teenagers who were at risk of dropping out of school. Ethan was enthusiastic, scribbling notes and setting up times for further planning. When they finished, he leaned back in his chair, smiling at her. "I'm really glad you're here," he said. She smiled back, feeling warmth flood her chest. "Me too." A few days later, Jade received a call from her roommate, saying someone had left a note for her at their apartment. Jade felt a chill as she picked it up that evening. It read, "Stay away from Ethan. Caroline belongs with him, not you." The note wasn't signed, but Jade had a strong suspicion who was behind it. Either Caroline was doubling down on her attempts, or Patrick was. It could have been someone loyal to them. Her hands shook as she read the threatening words. She immediately called Ethan, who insisted she pack a bag and come back to his penthouse. She resisted at first, not wanting to be chased out of her own home, but Ethan's concern made her reconsider. That night, she found herself once again in the penthouse guest room. Ethan apologized for the inconvenience. Jade told him it wasn't his fault. She tried to act calm, but fear gnawed at her. She worried that Caroline or Patrick might escalate their harassment. Ethan put a protective arm around her shoulders and guided her to the living room. "We need to address this directly," he said. "I'll have my lawyers send them a warning." Jade nodded, grateful for his support. She sank onto the sofa, trying to steady her breathing. "I just don't want this to ruin everything I've worked for." He sat beside her, his hand resting gently on hers. "It won't. I promise. We'll make sure they can't threaten you." She looked into his eyes, feeling a surge of emotion. He was always there for her, always offering reassurance. She leaned in and, before she could overthink it, pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. Ethan seemed startled for a moment, but then he turned his head and caught her lips with his, a gentle, tender kiss that spoke of mutual affection and relief. When they broke apart, both were breathing a bit faster. Jade looked down, a shy smile tugging at her lips. Ethan lifted her chin, gazing into her eyes. "I've wanted to do that for a while," he admitted softly. Jade felt her heart soar. "Me too," she whispered. After that evening, their relationship took on a new depth. They still worked side by side at the foundation, but they also shared intimate dinners, walked around the city, and talked late into the night. Jade felt like she was stepping into a dream she never dared to imagine. However, the shadow of Caroline and Patrick still loomed. Despite the lawyer sending a stern warning, Jade couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't done causing trouble. Ethan heightened his security measures, making sure Jade was always accompanied by someone he trusted. One afternoon, Jade was finalizing details for a fundraising event when Ethan rushed into her office, looking alarmed. "Caroline just called me," he said, trying to catch his breath. "She says Patrick found out she was still in contact with me. They had a huge fight. She wants me to meet her somewhere. She sounds desperate." Jade frowned. "Are you going?" He hesitated. "I feel like I should, to make her understand once and for all that there's no future for us. She sounded upset, and I don't want to be responsible if she does something reckless." Jade's stomach twisted. She trusted Ethan, but she hated the idea of him rushing to Caroline's side. Still, she knew he was the kind of person who wouldn't ignore someone in distress. "Be careful," she said quietly. "I don't trust her." He nodded. "I'll text you where I'm going. I'll have a security detail, just in case." With that, he left. Jade tried to focus on her work, but worry gnawed at her. Hours passed with no word from Ethan. Jade's anxiety grew. She checked her phone repeatedly, pacing in her office. Finally, just before the end of the day, she got a text. "I'm fine. Meeting took longer than expected. Heading home soon. We'll explain everything tonight." Relief washed over her, but she still felt on edge. She finished her tasks and went home. That evening, Ethan arrived at her apartment door, looking exhausted. She let him in, her eyes full of concern. "What happened?" He sank onto the couch. "Caroline was a wreck. She told me Patrick has been threatening her, blaming her for everything. She wants a divorce now, and she begged me to let her stay with me." Jade's heart skipped a beat. "And did you agree?" Ethan shook his head firmly. "Absolutely not. I told her she needs to handle her own mess. I also told her that if Patrick continues harassing you, I'll get the authorities involved. She insisted that Patrick is acting on his own, that she didn't know he was sending threats." Jade frowned. "Do you believe her?" Ethan sighed, rubbing his temples. "I don't know. She seemed genuinely scared of him, but I can't trust her. After the wedding fiasco and everything else, I just want to move on with my life. I made it clear that I'm with you now. That's not changing." Jade's cheeks warmed, and a small smile tugged at her lips. Hearing him say he was with her brought a sense of security she hadn't felt in a long time. "What did she do when you said that?" Jade asked. Ethan leaned back, recalling the moment. "She cried. She said she was sorry for hurting me, but I stood my ground. I told her there was nothing more to discuss. I left." Jade took his hand gently. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. He brought her hand to his lips. "I just want us to live in peace." Over the next weeks, Caroline filed for divorce from Patrick. The tabloids exploded with gossip, painting wild stories about infidelity and secret meetups. Ethan and Jade tried to ignore the rumors, focusing on her charity work. Some tabloids implied that Ethan had broken up Caroline's marriage, which upset Jade deeply. But Ethan assured her that people who knew the truth wouldn't believe the lies. One morning, Jade found a letter slipped under her office door at the foundation. Her stomach clenched, fearing another threat. But when she opened it, she saw it was from Caroline. "Jade, I'm sorry for the trouble I caused. I know you care about Ethan, and he cares about you. I'm filing for divorce because Patrick is not the man I thought he was. Please don't judge me too harshly. I hope one day we can leave the past behind. Caroline." Jade read it twice, unsure how to feel. It wasn't exactly an apology for everything, but it was a step. She showed the note to Ethan, who shrugged and said, "Maybe she's finally realizing the damage she did." He tossed the letter aside. "But don't worry about her. Focus on yourself and your future." Jade nodded. She was relieved that the threats seemed to be over. Caroline was moving on, and hopefully Patrick would too. Time passed, and as the months rolled on, Jade and Ethan's bond only grew stronger. Jade became an essential part of the foundation, launching successful mentorship and community outreach programs. She hired a small team of dedicated people who shared her vision. Together, they helped dozens of young adults find educational paths and jobs. Meanwhile, Jade moved out of her tiny room and into a better apartment, though she often stayed at Ethan's penthouse. She felt more confident and stable than ever. She also began taking night classes, working toward a degree in social work. Ethan supported her wholeheartedly, even offering to pay her tuition, though she insisted on covering as much as she could herself. One Friday evening, as they wrapped up a busy week at the foundation, Ethan invited Jade to a quiet dinner at his penthouse. She arrived after her night class, tired but happy to see him. He greeted her at the door with a warm hug, guiding her inside. The dining table was set with a candlelit meal, soft music playing in the background. Jade smiled in delight. "What's the occasion?" she teased. Ethan laughed. "Do I need an occasion to do something special for you?" They sat down to eat, chatting about the progress of their projects. After dinner, they moved to the living room, where Ethan poured them each a glass of wine. Jade curled up beside him on the couch, basking in the glow of the moment. Suddenly, Ethan stood up and walked over to a small cabinet. He pulled out a tiny box. Jade's heart began to race. He returned to the sofa, took her hand in his, and knelt down on one knee. "Jade," he said softly, opening the box to reveal a simple, elegant ring. "You changed my life in ways I never saw coming. I took you to that wedding to make someone else jealous, but I ended up finding the person who truly matters. I love your strength, your kindness, your passion for helping others. You make me a better man. Will you marry me?" Tears formed in Jade's eyes. She thought back to the day she sat on a bench, homeless and hungry, never imagining she would be here now. Emotion swirled through her. She smiled through her tears, nodding fervently. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling with joy. Ethan slipped the ring on her finger, and she threw her arms around him, laughter and tears mixing as they embraced. In that moment, all the struggles and drama they had faced melted away, replaced by the warmth of a shared future. News of Ethan Grant's engagement to Jade Hallowell spread quickly. Some tabloids tried to stir up drama, calling Jade a gold digger or digging into her past of homelessness. But Jade held her head high, knowing the truth of their love. Ethan's close friends and family, including his parents, welcomed Jade with open arms. They saw how happy she made him and recognized her strong character. The staff at the foundation celebrated enthusiastically, as Jade was much loved and respected there. One afternoon, Caroline sent Jade a text. "Congratulations. I'm happy for you both." "I truly am." Jade was grateful for the sentiment, relieved that perhaps Caroline had finally found acceptance in her own life. As Jade and Ethan planned their wedding, they decided to keep it modest. They wanted something warm and meaningful, not a flashy spectacle. They chose a lovely garden venue on the outskirts of the city, with a tranquil pond and blossoming flowers. They invited people who mattered to them, close friends, supportive co-workers, and individuals whose lives were touched by the foundation's work. Jade wore a simple white dress, not too expensive, but elegant and perfect for her. Ethan wore a tailored suit that matched her dress with subtle accents. On the day of the wedding, the sun shone brightly, and a soft breeze carried the scent of fresh blooms. Jade stood at the entrance to the garden, her heart pounding with excitement. As the music began, she walked down the aisle, seeing Ethan's broad smile and tear-filled eyes. They exchanged vows that spoke of gratitude for second chances, of finding love in the most unexpected places, and of dedicating their lives to helping others. When they sealed their vows with a kiss, the small crowd erupted in cheers and applause. At the reception, guests danced and enjoyed a buffet of favorite dishes from Jade's childhood and Ethan's family recipes. Instead of fancy wedding cake, they had a homemade one baked by a local bakery that supported job training for disadvantaged women, an example of the very work they championed. Jade moved around the garden, greeting guests and thanking them for coming. She felt a radiant joy that made every step lighter. Ethan was never far from her side, sometimes slipping his arm around her waist as they chatted with friends. During a quiet moment, Jade looked over the small pond, reflecting on how far she had come. She felt Ethan's presence behind her, and he wrapped his arms around her gently. "You okay?" he asked softly. She nodded, tears of happiness forming in her eyes. "I'm more than okay. This is everything I never knew I needed." He kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Mrs. Grant." She turned in his arms and smiled brightly. "I love you, too." That evening, when the guests had gone and the sun had set, Jade and Ethan sat together under a canopy of twinkling lights. They were tired from the day's excitement, but their hearts were full. Ethan lifted his glass of sparkling cider. They had decided to celebrate with a non-alcoholic toast for reasons dear to them both, and clinked it against Jade's. "To us and to the future," he said. Jade clinked back. "To hope, second chances, and the power of kindness." They sipped their drinks, content in the silence of the moment, grateful for the path that had brought them here. In the months that followed, Jade and Ethan continued building their life together. They expanded the foundation, reached more communities, and even started a special shelter program designed to help those who had lost jobs and homes get back on their feet, much like Jade once needed. Whenever Jade visited the new shelter, she spoke with people facing hardships. She listened to their stories with true understanding and shared her own when it seemed helpful. She wanted them to see that hope wasn't a fantasy. It could be real if someone believed in you. Ethan, for his part, poured not just money but also time and energy into every project. Together, they formed a team that was both personally and professionally unstoppable. Their marriage thrived on mutual respect, shared goals, and a deep love that had grown from an unlikely beginning. Occasionally, Jade would think back to that wedding day, Caroline's wedding, where it all started in such a bizarre way. She remembered feeling out of place, unsure she was just a pawn in someone else's plan to stir jealousy. Yet it turned into the moment that set her on a path to discover her own worth and find true love. Now, whenever doubts or fears surfaced, Jade simply looked at Ethan, remembered how he believed in her when she was at her lowest, and felt a surge of gratitude and confidence. She had found her place in the world, not only as Ethan's wife, but as a force for good in her own right. They often reminisced about their unexpected journey. Sometimes they laughed at the absurdity of their first big event together, a wedding that wasn't theirs but changed both their lives. Other times, they spoke quietly about the hardships Jade had faced and how it had made her the compassionate woman she was. In the end, love, understanding, and a desire to help others triumphed over jealousy and fear. Jade and Ethan's story became an inspiration for many who heard it, showing that even when life seems hopeless, a single act of kindness can open the door to an incredible future. And so they lived hand in hand, hearts intertwined, ready to face any challenge the world might throw at them, together and stronger for it. Dear amazing family, I want to take a moment to say thank you for spending your valuable time on my story. Your support and interest mean more than words can describe. Seeing your responses and knowing you followed along on this journey truly warms my heart. If you enjoy what you read, I'd love to invite you to subscribe to my page or channel and leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Your feedback helps me grow and motivates me to keep creating stories that move and inspire. Thank you again for being such a wonderful audience.